Check Podcasts. Hi, I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. This is Chamber Chats, coming to you, as always, from the podcasting studios of the Czech Media Group. I would like to acknowledge that I live and work in the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen-speaking nations, known to us as Songhees and Esquimalt. And Chamber Chats is made possible by the support of Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union. A team of experts are standing by with solutions as unique as your business. When our conversations with family, friends, co-workers come around to issues like homelessness, living in the rough, addictions, mental health, overdoses, a whole range of emotions come forward. You hear a lot of frustration. You hear a lot of anger. You get a lot of sympathy. You get sadness, all of it combined together. And those conversations usually also mention Our Place as a facility here that takes care of many of the people impacted by those issues. It's time for us to do a catch-up with Julian Daly, who's the CEO at Our Place. Julian, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks for having me, Bruce.
I want to take a look back about a year ago from now. We were still sort of in more of a recovery mode out of the pandemic. Compare now to a year ago at Our Place.
Yeah, it's there's kind of good and there's not so good. There's many things that we've made a lot of progress in, and positive things of hope. Like we have brought on more housing. We opened our first permanent housing facility in Saanich last year. We also secured funding last year, ongoing funding for a men's therapeutic recovery community treatment center in View Royal. And we also very recently, I think it was in the media just a few weeks ago, secured funding for 20 beds, recovery beds for women who need treatment on the island. And those will be opening this year. So we also continue to deliver our meal service, which is, especially with the cost of living going up over the last year or so and inflation, more people have found themselves in an insecure position with their food. So last year we served 470,000 meals, so nearly 500,000 meals. So we've continued to do that piece of work as well. So all those things, I think, have been really, really positive, particularly the housing and recovery work and the meals and the food security work that we've done. Other things haven't either changed or have got worse in the last year. I think particularly of all the opioid overdose deaths, we've seen so many people die just in our own world here at Our Place. In the last 3 or 4 months, we've had 11 people die of overdoses. That's just in our immediate community, and we know across our province those deaths just continue to grow despite all the interventions that government is making, and they are. But it is quite bleak that, and obviously every death is someone that we know and have a relationship with, and it affects their friends, their family, and my colleagues. We've also seen, I think, no real progress on Pandora Avenue, where too many people continue to make that their home because they don't have a home, and to see people living rough the way they are, through the winter particularly, has been very difficult. And I know a lot of citizens are very unhappy about that and people being there. And some people think that, Our Place is at fault for it, although we have no control over what happens there. So that situation remains a real worry to us. As I said, the drug crisis and the health crisis that we see on our streets. And I think those are things that really, the needle, as they say, hasn't moved much, and that remains a huge concern for us. And we have, to that end, made a commitment, to our community, at least, that by December 2024, every single person who's currently on Pandora Avenue living rough will be offered, and we will work with our partners on this, offered a pathway off Pandora, because it just can't be allowed to go on like this. It's inhumane, and it's a desperate way for any human being to have to live, and it's also frightening to other people, and it makes citizens who aren't unhoused feel afraid. It means that some people don't come and use our services. There's so many good reasons to find people who are currently on Pandora a better place to be, and that's what we're going to be doing this year.
There's just so much to unpack from all of that stuff, which we're going to do over
Yeah.
the next few minutes here. But I've asked you this question before, and we've had conversations about it. As people drive by, walk past on Pandora and other places and see these folks that are living in those conditions, who are they? Who are those people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as part of the 4-point plan we put out last year to address what's happening on Pandora, we said the first thing we need to do is to be in relationship with those people and find out why are they there. So my colleagues, our street outreach team, which is only 2 people, but they went and talked with every single person who is on Pandora Avenue. They talked to 86 people. About 50 or 60 of whom are a pretty core group there. And they just simply ask them those questions. They ask, how did you end up here? Why are you here? How long have you been here? And what would it take to get you away from here? What would it take to get you off Pandora? And we got a by name list. So everyone we talked to gave us their name. No one was worried to give us their name, and we have a lot of detail about what it would take to get them off. So that's a crucial first step, because otherwise you're working with a whole lot of assumptions of why people are there and what it takes to get them off. And now we do know with some certainty. So that's first step. And obviously the next step is to get them the things that they said they wanted to get them off. There was a few things that were interesting about that work, Bruce. And one was that not one single person said they wanted to stay on Pandora, because there's a bit of a kind of a myth out there, an urban myth, that people just kind of want to be there and just kind of party, and they don't want housing, they don't want shelter, they don't want help. That's not true. Every single person said they wanted off there and wanted to be in a different place. Also, 84% of the people that we talked to had been homeless and on and off Pandora for more than a year too. So again, I know there are people who do come to our city and from elsewhere to access services, but it's clear from that piece of work that the vast majority of people on Pandora Avenue right now have been there for a considerable length of time.
There's been an increase in a certain demographic of people as well that our place is serving. We're going to talk about that next. Our guest on Chamber Chats today is Julian Daly. He is the CEO of the Our Place Society. There was a story that I think I saw it on Czech News, as a matter of fact, that an increasing number of seniors, especially females, are ending up on the street or in the care of Our Place. What's that all about?
Yeah, we've seen a significant, I think it's safe to say, growth in the amount of seniors accessing our services. I think folk often assume that everyone who comes to our place is homeless, and they're not. In fact, there are a lot of people who come to our place, particularly for our food services, because they can't make ends meet. We have a lot of folk living in Victoria who've retired here who are on modest fixed incomes. And with inflation and the increase in cost of living, they really can ill afford food. And there are some people who come to 1 or 2 meals a day, and some come for all 3 meals. So we've seen that increase. The other area of increase we've seen is because of renovictions.
Oh, yeah.
And particularly, in the neighborhood I actually live in myself, James Bay, where there are a lot of older people living there who've been living there since the 70s, 80s, 90s, and now finding their buildings being renovated, and they're being evicted essentially, and they're being offered alternative accommodation or accommodation back in the building they were living in, but at hugely increased rental rates, which they simply cannot afford. So yeah, we've had a number of seniors actually coming in using our emergency night shelter as a place of refuge because they've lost their homes and become homeless because of that.
And to go back to those that are on the street, the ones that are the more volatile element, that people have the perception of them being that volatile anyway. So I guess the simple answer is you manage manage housing, you manage addictions, and you manage mental health. But it's not that simple. It's incredibly complicated. How do you even begin with that?
I think you begin with what you know works, and I often it's quite bleak when you look at the drug crisis and the amount of people dying. But when I go out to our therapeutic recovery community treatment center in View Royal and I meet with the men there, which I do, every week nearly, I'm filled with hope because I see people, some of who actually were on Pandora last year, living rough in the midst of their addictions. I meet men who are now sober, clean, they understand their addictions, they have tools with which to manage their addictions. They're getting jobs, they're doing education. Some of them didn't finish high school, they're finishing that. And they all, to a person, to a man, have a plan for their life. They have a renewed confidence and energy and full of hope. So I know that while it doesn't work for everyone, that works for a lot of people. And I know that that works, and we need more of that. And that's where we as an organization are trying to support as many people into recovery as possible. And I know the government's bringing a lot more on and supporting that, which is great to see, and including supporting our place to provide this year 20 beds, recovery beds for women. And there's been literally nothing on this island for women up till now, nothing like what we have at View Royal. So I'm really happy about that. So yeah, you start with what works, and recovery I know works, and forms of treatment. And this is I think it's safe to say that you look at places like Pandora Avenue, you see people living rough, that it is more a health crisis than a housing crisis. Really, the people are many of those folk, if not the majority, are unhoused because of their health, because of their mental health and their addictions. And you've talked a lot about this, Bruce, and brought it to public attention. And when we surveyed those 86 folk on Pandora Avenue, 75% of them had some combination of mental health and/or addiction challenges, to the point that they would need a health intervention in order to maintain their housing if they were to get it again. Because many of them have had housing, but they lost it because of their mental health challenges and their addiction challenges, and sometimes a combination of the two. So we also need to, I think, put a lot of our focus, the unhoused, in those areas.
When you talk about people receiving care, there's a number of those folks that have made repeated 911 visits to care facilities, to hospitals. Um, where does the concept of involuntary care come into this when someone is not in a position to make a decision in their own best interest? A number of them, as you've pointed out to me, are actually brain injured because of the use of drugs and alcohol or some violent incident that happened. So where's involuntary care fit into all this?
It definitely needs to be there. I know it's a very controversial area, and I'd be the last person to say that we need to, have a wholesale involuntary care approach in Victoria. Absolutely not. But I'm also equally clear that there are a number of people who are on the streets because of their mental health and addictions and the severity of them, and that because of the brain injury they may have suffered through repeated overdoses and the particular drugs they might be taking and the particular mental health challenges that they're facing, all of which are kind of interlinked, that they're simply not in a position to make an informed decision about their healthcare. They really aren't, and they're very unwell. And the longer they stay on the street, the more likely they are, frankly, to die, or certainly, at the very least, be vulnerable to all sorts of exploitation. And for women, that can be very, very dangerous in terms of trafficking, etc. So I think we have an obligation as a society to those that are most vulnerable and least able to make an informed decision about their health to have some form of involuntary care for them, at the very least, so that they can stabilize and get to a place where they can make further decisions about their health care. But they simply can't right now, and that makes them very, very vulnerable. It can be lethal. I think we should have a limited capacity with all the checks and balances you would imagine to do that.
I have seen, so many people have seen countless episodes on the street where someone is obviously impaired, probably by drugs of some kind. So the question that people sometimes ask me, and in a minute I'm going to ask you, where do they get the drugs? We're going to talk about that next. Our guest on Chamber Chats today is Julian Daly, the CEO of Our Place. So yeah, when we see somebody tripping out on the street, having an experience, Julian, where do those drugs come from? Like how are they getting here? Where do they come from? How do they get
Well,
them?
I don't know. I know the people who are getting them on the street are getting them from their dealer.
Yeah.
Where they ultimately come from, I don't know. I know as much as anyone in some are manufactured here in Canada, some are manufactured. Certainly, the early days of fentanyl, a lot of it was coming from China, and some of it comes from south of the border. There's no doubt. So probably a range of places. I think that's a pretty moving target. But yeah, but the people on a day-to-day basis, they get it from their dealers.
When we talk about giving people the treatment beds, the recovery beds that they need, two terms that we hear quite often are primary care and complex care. Can you explain those to me, please?
Yeah, well, primary care is the basic sort of health care that those of us who are lucky enough to have a general practitioner will access, and most people who are homeless and certainly people on the street do not have access to any basic healthcare. And if you do walk down Pandora Avenue and you take a close look at some folk, you'll see people with open wounds and sores and people with broken limbs and a whole variety of basic healthcare needs being unattended to. We are lucky in Victoria. We have Kool-Aid who do great kind of primary care outreach into the community, and they have two vans doing that. And I think that helps a lot of folk. But most people do not have access to a general practitioner and their health. And some people are reluctant to get health care too because they've had bad experiences in the healthcare system. I think that's often true of Indigenous people, and therefore they will let their conditions go unattended. So that's kind of one area that we definitely need more support around because it's not often talked about. And it's good you phrased it because we're very focused on the addictions and mental health, appropriately. But the amount of people that you see in wheelchairs who are living rough and people with very serious health conditions that are unattended to is also growing. So that there's that piece, and then the second piece is complex care. Now that is a term that's been used by the government to describe the new supports they brought on, and these are that supports usually in a housing situation where multidisciplinary teams will come in. So psychiatrists, counselors, addiction workers, social workers, and various and indeed primary care to work with people who are particularly challenged in terms of their mental health and addictions. And they have it's complex care because it's complicated because they have a number of different things that are not going well for them, and these teams have been constructed to support the whole gamut, if you want, of challenges that they face in order to stabilize the folks so they no longer need complex care, and also to prevent evictions too. Because some people lose their housing because they have complex care needs that are unmet. So part of what the government is doing is to give people the help they need in terms of the complexity, and therefore people can retain their housing, which is great because those folk were losing their housing because of the lack of complex care support and then ending up on the street. And those are the folk that many people see walking around town, making, screaming, shouting, kind of obviously in mental health distress because of their complex care needs. And now more and more of those folk are having those needs met. So, we should begin to see a reduction in the amount of people out on the street with complex care needs.
And when we talk about, we keep talking about Pandora all the time. People need to remember, though, that you do have that facility in View Royal. You mentioned the housing thing. I want to swing to housing now in Saanich. That's on Albina Street. So Albina
Yep.
Street is right near the corner of Gorge and Tillicum. If you can imagine where the
Yep.
Fairway Market is, and I've toured that building. You made that possible. Thank you. That building popped up about 8 months ago, I guess. So tell me about the situation, a building like that you're creating, that you manage. What's life like in there for those people?
It's great. It's lovely. It's much nicer than anything I lived in until I was about 35 years old. And it's everyone has their own self-contained unit, has a washroom, bathroom, and a very small cooking area, and very high ceilings. So they feel spacious even though they're not huge. And there's also community spaces in the building, and there's food available. There's a full kitchen where we provide 2 meals a day, and then there's support services, counseling services. There's some primary care services. There's also folk there to support people with addictions who want to make some changes, and we have our workers there as well. So it's a fully supported 24/7 building. But it is potentially a permanent home for folk. As you said, it's a great location. It's near shops for folk and transit. And we did a fair bit of work with the local community before people moved in, because there was some anxieties about having a supportive housing facility in that neighborhood, because they'd never had anything like that before. And we toured local folk, and we continued to have engagement with the local community day to day, but also formal meeting every month. And just at the last one, the number of people who live locally got up and spoke about how positive it's been, and how they've been surprised. They thought it might make the neighborhood worse, but they actually feel it's enhanced the neighborhood. And some of the residents from our building, they go around and clean up the neighborhood. It's like a clean team, so we're trying to actively contribute to it. People who are living there are really enjoying it because it's a beautiful building, a great location. We've had people who have now decided to go into treatment and get and recovery because they're living there. Because when you live in a nice space, and it's your permanent home potentially, and you can't lose it and you won't lose it, you begin to have hope again. Many of the people they were people out on the streets in the camps just like a few years ago, and now finally they have a real home and they can start rebuilding their lives. And there's a real spirit of optimism and hope amongst the folk, because now they have something to live for. Frankly, I think for some of them, for quite a few years, they felt hopeless. They didn't feel there was a lot on for them, and a lot of reasons for them to be hopeful. But now they have that, and that building has been a really important part of doing that. There's no doubt the impact of the environment. We all know that, but homeless people are no different.
Yeah. Julian, thank you for all you do, you and your team. If you want to find out more, go to ourplace.com. You can also find out there how you can help them do the work that they do, which is so important for so many people. Julian Daly is the CEO of Our Place. Julian, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you.
And I'm Bruce Williams. We'll see you again for another Chamber Chats.